Hello, I'm Paul Carroll and welcome to this digital photo video tutorial on printing and colour management. In this tutorial I'm going to be explaining some of the basics of colour management and identifying a good workflow for your images from camera through to printer. So why can it be so difficult for your printed results to match the screen? It should be simple, surely? Well, no, it's actually quite complex. In a photographer's workflow from capture through to print, there are three devices involved: your camera, your monitor and a printer. And each of these devices define colour in a different way. Your computer monitor, for example, is able to reproduce a much wider range of colours than your printer. So you can make colour adjustments to your images on screen, but when the data is transferred to your printer, some of the depth of that colour information has to be redefined, as your printer cannot reproduce it. To further add to the complication, the way we see images from these devices is different too. Viewing images on a screen which is transmitting an RGB light signal is very different from viewing reflected light off a page with CMYK inks, where the ambient light viewing conditions will also have a bearing on how the colours look. So I think we need to try and be realistic about what our relatively simple home setups can achieve, and try not to worry too much about our prints matching the screen exactly, otherwise it will quite easily drive you around the bend and cost you a fortune in wasted ink and paper. If your images are being distributed electronically for reproduction in different magazines, or sent through to repro houses for printing, then there's a good reason really to get to grips with understanding the intricacies of colour management. But it's a dark art, and even the professionals are scratching their heads sometimes, so to expect us laymen to fully comprehend it is asking a bit much. What is of importance to us is to get some consistently decent printed results from our home setups. Within Adobe Colour Suite and your printer drivers, there's a range of different options for managing colour. This video lesson then shows you how to set up these options correctly so that you can get consistent results time and time again, and where to look if things start going badly astray. Different printer manufacturers have their menu options titled and laid out in slightly different ways, although the functionality is broadly the same. In this tutorial I'm going to be using an Epson printer and Epson printer drivers, but if you don't use Epson, we've included a PDF document on the CD which will give you a guide to the menu options of different printers. Colour management is all about defining preferences between your imaging devices. So as your images pass between these devices, there is some consistency in how the colours are represented. The first options that we're going to look at are Photoshop's colour settings. Now these are found under the Edit menu, down towards the bottom, Colour Settings. Now you'll notice that I've accessed this menu without having an image open on the screen. The reason for this is by assigning the colour settings to Photoshop's working space without a document open, means that these settings will apply not just to one image, but become the default settings across Photoshop, which means every time I now open a new document, these colour settings will be applied to it. Under the working space menu, we have four options: RGB, CMYK, Grey and Spot. The list of options under the RGB menu is the one that we're most concerned with, because all of our imaging devices use RGB colours. CMYK printing is utilised by professionals because of the wider colour ranges this process can produce. Although many inkjet printers nowadays use CMYK inks, they are actually RGB devices, and our images do not need to be converted to CMYK for the printer to accurately reproduce the colours within them. Under the RGB drop-down list, we have a few options that define for Photoshop what colour gamut, which means colour range, we want to use. From this list, we want to select sRGB. Now if I hover over the sRGB option, the description at the bottom tells us that sRGB reflects the characteristics of an average PC monitor. The standard space is endorsed by many hardware and software manufacturers and is becoming the default colour space for many scanners, low-end printers and software applications. It's an ideal space for web work, but not recommended for pre-press work because of its limited colour gamut. Now although it has a limited colour gamut, this setting is the most appropriate one for us to use because it's commonly used within our digital cameras and printers. And as we're not converting to CMYK for printing, the fact that it has a narrow colour gamut will not significantly reduce the reproduction quality of our prints. Moving down to the next menu, We can ignore the CMYK options because, as we've already established, we don't have any CMYK devices in our workflow, and we will not be opening or converting any documents into CMYK. The grey and spot menus define the representation and brightness of the midtones. Set the grey to Gamma 2.2, which is the Windows default for most monitors. However, if your monitor uses a different gamma setting, which you can find out from the manual, you may want to change this accordingly. Otherwise, Gamma 2.2 will be fine. The spot option is similar to the grey option and defines the brightness of spot colours, and the standard setting of 20% dot gain is fine. So with our working space preferences established, we can move on to the next menu, Colour Management Policies. These options dictate to Photoshop what it should do with documents that you open. The reason for this is all documents contain a colour profile which was assigned to them by the device they were initially captured on. For example, you may open images from your camera or somebody else's, or have images from a scanner, all of which might have different colour profiles. For consistency of printed results, therefore, I would recommend that we tell Photoshop to convert the documents to use the colour profile that you've just set in the working space. Then you'll know where you are with all the docs that are open in Photoshop. You can see under the drop-down list for RGB that we have three options: Off, Preserve Embedded Profiles, or Convert to Working RGB. So let's select Convert to Working RGB, and then any documents that are opened within Photoshop will be assigned the working RGB settings which we've set up here in the working space. We'll also select the same option, Convert to Working, under the CMYK menu and under the grey menu. The tick boxes against profile mismatches and missing profiles give us the option of Photoshop prompting us if we try to open a document which contains a different profile to the profile that we've assigned in our working space. This can be a little annoying, as a dialog box appears every time you open an image with a conflicting profile, and as we've established, we're happy for Photoshop to convert the profile, so I suggest you leave these boxes unticked. If, however, you feel a little more confident about telling Photoshop to assign a different profile depending on what you plan to do, for example, if you're working on some images taken on a camera set to Adobe RGB colour space, and you're not planning to print them, but instead want to publish them on the web, then there would be some advantage over keeping the original profile, which has a wider colour range. But for home printing purposes, it's easier to leave these boxes unticked. Now we've set up our own custom settings, we can save these settings to our computer in order that we can load them up each time. I'm going to call mine Paul Home, click Save, and that's now saved it to my computer. It's asking me whether I want to add any comments, so if I was creating a specific profile for a particular workflow, for example, I could put some comments in here about the type of paper, printer, documents that I'm working on. But as this is a standard setting across multiple workflows, I'm just going to click OK and not put any comments. And you can see that it's put my bespoke name there, Paul Home, into the settings dialog box. So with all that complete, our colour settings are inputted. I can just click OK, and that assigns them to Photoshop, and they'll be applied to any documents that we now open. That's it then for part 1 of this video tutorial. In part 2, we're going to continue looking at Photoshop's colour management settings under the Print with Preview option. And we're also going to be looking at your printer's drivers so that we can set the options up so you can get cracking prints every time.